think what made making this documentary film possible is the expertise and insights of all the panelists that appeared in the film. So I really appreciate their being here. We have several microphones. We're going to split them up. I think I'm supposed to be in the middle here. Yeah, you guys just scoot down. Okay. So everybody can hear us well, hopefully. Okay, so what we're going to do is we have 3 questions for each of the panelists. We're going to do one at a time. The panelists have been given the questions in advance, and they're going to have about 2 minutes or so to respond to the question. And then when we're done with the questions, we're going to give the audience a chance to ask some questions of the panelists. So I'd like to start, we'll go from left to right, and we'll start with David. But before we do that, I want the panelists just to introduce themselves very quickly, if you don't mind doing that.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. David Levy, partner with the Barrett Home Law Firm here in Omaha, and in a prior life, a city planner for the city and county of San Francisco.
Hello, I'm Eric Miller. I am a transportation or transit planner with a consulting firm that's has an office here in Omaha called Felsberg Holden Ludwig, or FHU. This is my 4th different company that I've worked for. I was in Denver for 19 years and worked for the transit agency there. So, but I've been in transit planning for 21 years.
Hi everyone, my name is Clarice Dombeck. For my day job, I work for a nonprofit organization called the Redress Movement, where I'm the senior campaign organizer. I am also on the newly elected board for Regional Metro Transit Authority. And in addition to that, I serve on the board of Bike Walk Nebraska.
Hi, I'm Lauren Cencic. I'm the CEO of Metro Transit. Lifelong transit nerd, and have been working in transit planning for over 20 years.
Hi, my name is Yanira Garcia, and I am, like Clarice over there, on the board for the Regional Metro Transit Authority, District 3.
Steve Jensen, urban planner, former planning director, retired. I work as a consultant and also work in the mayor's office, primarily on the streetcar.
Okay, thank you. So I'll start with David, and we'll move this way. The first question we have is pretty much all of the speakers in the film made a strong case for why it's important to start rebuilding the urban core, and why density was important, not just in the urban core, but in other nodes throughout the city. So the first question that I'm going to ask you to answer is, do you think that most Omahans are aware of the need for density and for rebuilding the urban core? And if not, how do we communicate that need to the broader Omaha audience?
First, I was thinking it'd be a better idea to start at the right end of the group with Steve. No, I'm kidding. It's a great question, and the part, do I think people are aware? Yes and no, right, at many, many different levels and with many, many different perspectives. You hear the people who say, well,
the microphone button.
Sorry, a little closer, okay. Who say, well, downtown's great, but I never go there because I can't park, right? Give it a try. I bet you park within a block of where you're going. I told Steve tonight I parked, and I thought I was a little farther away. I realized I parked right outside the front door, right? I mean, so it can happen. I also think, though, I think probably everybody here intrinsically values the urban core and the ability to get around in and out of your automobile, and all of the things that offers our city, and how it makes us so much richer as a city, and people who live here and people who want to visit here. But for many people, that's just not something they think about, or it might not be something that they sort of intrinsically value. And I think if you can show people how it positively affects their daily life, maybe in West Omaha, if you can show how it makes property taxes more, or, you know, city services. Yeah, right, well, yeah, but to drive all the time,
Yeah.
right, and have parking garages and surface parking lots, all the things we talked about. If you can bring it to people in terms that they understand, in terms they already think about every day, I think you have a lot better chance of convincing people to give it a try, if you will, than if you say, darn it, transit's good and you should all ride it.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I think that, that kind of from my perspective, I kind of agree, there's a lot of people that don't. I'd say that like the kind of west area that I live in, there's a lot of people that don't realize this is a problem. I think somebody like me that's been back to Omaha for a couple of years and was living in Denver, and there's a lot of crazy traffic there that, you know, especially being there almost 20 years, it just kept progressively getting worse. And I come here and I'm like, this is great. I don't know what you're talking about. Like traffic, it's not that bad. It's easy to get across town. So it's a little different perspectives. But I think, you know, getting the word out, one, having a film like this is a great step in the right direction to that. We need to do a lot more public interfacing and talking to people. How to get them really interested, you know, I don't know. That's going to be tough because sometimes I think about, well, maybe we need to come up with some, I don't know, some kind of vote that gets people excited, or you know, what the old saying, money doesn't talk, it screams. If we figure out something that, you know, is going to hit their pocketbook, or come up with some proposal and, you know, and say, well, this is why we're doing it, because this really is a problem, and you know, maybe, you know, we just have to do something small that kind of gets them to step in the right direction. But yeah, definitely trying to get out to the public and educate people more, I think is huge. And that's one thing that I like to do, is just go out to talk to people, write articles as much as I can, things like that.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, so I don't think that most Omahans are aware of like the need to increase or re-increase density in the urban core. I think that there are segments of our population who are like elders in our community that I speak with a lot. They remember like what it was like when there actually was density in our urban core in North Omaha and then also in South Omaha, and how that was supplemented by, you know, the streetcar, and how there were, you know, so many people out and about and walking in the streets, and they have a sense of nostalgia about that. And I think there is a desire from our younger communities, even people younger than me, to have that sort of like increased density and increased access to different forms of mobility and transportation. But there's also even sort of like before I came into this space of urban planning and urban design and all that, I was also one of those folks who in my everyday life was like experiencing sort of like the need to or the desire to have sort of like increased density in my neighborhood that I grew up in, because it's like, okay, well, I want to move out my parents' house, and I want to stay close, but there aren't any apartments that that fit my needs and my desires in this neighborhood, or I don't want to own a car, but there isn't the sort of like robust transportation available for me, like where I'm living right now. Like I didn't know what that was. I didn't know that that was, you know, related to density and development patterns and zoning and all those things. So those different populations of people who, you know, want and see that this is a need do exist. But unfortunately, from, you know, my experience as just a community member, and then also my experience as someone who has been working in this spaces, is that oftentimes these conversations aren't happening at the community or neighborhood level soon enough. And oftentimes we aren't hearing about these things until we happen to see a article in the, you know, coming from whatever news station. And it's like by the time that information gets to us, for one, it's too late for us to be able to provide input into that process. And then for two, it just, community engagement that does come after that often feels like an afterthought. So I think one way to be able to communicate those needs to a broader audience in Omaha is for really developers to be able to step up and do a lot more of this direct and sustained community outreach and engagement from the very beginning of the process, and for there to be requirements at the city level for that to happen, not just within 100 feet of a project, but throughout the entire neighborhood.
Thanks, good point. I'm gonna just remind you guys, we do have a couple of other questions, so try to keep it to 2 or 3 minutes if you can.
I'll try. I promise. So, definitely, I think actually thinking about this film, and thank you for putting it together, really talks about, the need for density and did such a beautiful job explaining the need for it. But really beyond that went further and really talked about building our neighborhoods and our cities and our infrastructure for other modes of transportation, for walking, biking, and transit. It is about density, but it's also about making sure that people can walk to and from the bus stop. So the way I generally explain it, my quick little quips are, nobody's trying to get from a bus stop to a bus stop. They have to be able to walk to it. And then, of course, really just kind of thinking about how all of this fits together. I don't think there's a great understanding of that. We here at Metro hear all the time of, oh, there's a new apartment building, there's a new business, there's a new job opening up somewhere, usually in West Omaha, but could be anywhere else. And is the bus going to start coming next week? And we really need to start thinking about transit as one of the pieces of infrastructure that we talked about in the film that we're really need to be managed carefully and thoughtfully. And it's so important that we integrate the land use planning with the transportation planning. It's something that we just have to continue to improve at as a region, and that's conversations like this. This is people thinking about it earlier in the process, like Clarice said, and really just continuing to partner together.
In the essence of time, and to keep it moving here, I feel like a lot of what the points that everyone here has touched already, I agree with, and it's pretty much the same sentiment from what I've heard from my experience living in the city. And at the end of the day, it is very much an infrastructure thing, right? Just 2 weeks ago, I was at a South Omaha Neighborhood Association meeting where somebody was talking about a great plan of a development project that's coming to South Omaha and so on and so forth, and it sounds beautiful and it sounds great. And then when I had a conversation with the person, they had not thought about public transportation and how that affects that. So again, just kind of bringing it back to, we need to think about these things. We talk so much about creating an environment or a city that welcomes everybody, that caters to everyone, that makes everyone want to stay and not leave, right? So that means we have to put the work into that ahead of time. And somebody said in the video, complex, I think it was you, complex issues have complex solutions. Well, that includes, we all know that a lot of cooks in the kitchen brings a complex situation, but at the end of the day, we all live here and we all want to stay here, so we should all be included in that.
Excellent point, thank you.
Well, I don't think people understand density for the most part. Just a quick example of that, my daughter, a number of years ago, lived in a neighborhood where there was a park that they could walk to down the street. There was a grocery store they could walk to. There was our grandkids were going to the elementary school that was just down the street, and they walked there. But they were ready to move up to a bigger house, and I asked her where she was interested in moving, and so she mentioned an area that was all acreages. And I said, well, okay, why did you want to go there? And she said, well, I like the big lawn and, big area, a lot of room for the kids to play. And she said, but when do you think they'll build the park down the street? And when do you think the school will open up nearby? And when will there be a grocery store nearby? And I said, well, there won't be because it's acreages and there's just not enough density. And she looked at me like, what do you mean not enough density? That doesn't make any sense. And so I don't think people do understand density in general. And how important that is to making a lot of things work. And so I think, that is a hard thing to explain. It's a hard thing to get across to people. And again, I think one last thing I'll say, and try and keep this short, is that, the other part of this is that when we did all of the work on the riverfront, I've heard people in West Omaha say, well, why don't we have that out here? Well, if you're going to have a one-of-a-kind place, you want it to be accessible to everybody. You want to, people to be able to go there, and you want it to be in a place where that has density. And so it makes sense to make that kind of investment in the urban core. If you made it out, in far West Omaha, where everybody had to drive to get there, not as many people would be able to enjoy that investment. So it does make a difference, not just in terms of dollars and cents, but it makes a lot of sense in terms of how we provide amenities for the public.
Thanks, Steve. Steve, I'm going to start with you for the second question. We'll move this way. So in the film, there's a lot of discussion about the general reluctance of some Omahans to take public transit. And I'll give you an example of something I've observed. My wife and I live downtown, and a lot of times we'll be walking to an event at the CHI Center. Maybe it's a Creighton basketball game, maybe it's a concert, and there'll be these really, really long lines of cars queued up. People honking their horns and upset because they can't find parking. And I'll watch as the Orbit bus pulls up to the Orbit station close to the CHI Center, and nobody will get off. And it's like, why aren't people, driving to the West Roads, jumping on Orbit, and in 20 minutes being downtown and a couple blocks from the CHI Center? So what do you think it will take to convince people to try public transit in Omaha?
Well, I think, it has to be considered convenient, but I think Eric made the point in the film about people understanding it, experiencing it, and then sort of getting over this idea that, well, I don't know how to use it, I don't know where to go, and I don't know what to do. And so I think that's probably one of the biggest things. I think, let's face it, we also make it easy to drive to the CHI Health Center. We don't necessarily like the traffic when we get there, but we do like being able to park and then just walk in the front door. So I think, over time, our plan for the city has always been to redevelop those parking lots around the center. There will be parking provided as well, but to add more density, more activity, more hotels and so forth, especially with the expansion of the convention center. So, I think that we have to make it convenient, as Orbit is for that purpose. But I think we also have to help people, sort of educate them and show them that it makes a lot of sense to use Orbit in that way.
I think I forgot the question.
Yeah, the question is, what do you think it's going to take to get people to ride public transit?
Yeah, so I do agree with that mentality of just being able to, again, experience it for yourself. And I feel like a lot of the comments, whenever there's an event, whenever there's something major going on, the first question is there parking? And so I think it's going to take a while to get over that mentality, but we definitely have an opportunity, especially with the younger populations, the younger generations that are eager to promote this more, they want the opportunities to be able to show off that their city also has these opportunities. Much like Clarice, I also have friends that have intentionally moved into downtown, the downtown area for that reason, to be able to ride the bus and use more walking distance or walk to wherever they need to be. And so I think it's going to be through that. It's going to take time, but I am a professional marketing and public relations person, so obviously I'm putting on that hat and thinking about it's gonna take some great campaigning to encourage people to use public transit.
So I think there's definitely a reluctance in a lot of places, but there's also some really great momentum that's happening. For example, the Union Omaha Soccer Club is a big fan of transit. They regularly use it all of the time and really use it to get together and go to events. We also have things like the Memorial Park event where we actually have to bring in and stage multiple buses to be able to carry the loads out to West Roads. And I've been on orbit buses when Central High School is letting out, like to your point about the younger generation. They're occasionally packed like sardines right when Central's letting out. So there is momentum in places, but it all boils down to, this is a past life of mine when I used to do a lot of interviews and surveys in different cities around the world about what do they need to do, why aren't more people riding public transit? And the number one answer I always got to that question of why didn't you ride the bus today was, didn't think about it. And so it really, really boils down to, is it in the front of somebody's mind? Is it something that is brought up as a way to get to the event? And so those things where we have lots of people using transit to get to or from those events or to or from that school, that takes a really strong partnership and a lot of promotion and awareness and conversation to have that happen. So what we tend to do at Metro very much is to get over that hump of, it never occurred to me, is really going to people where they are, trying to bring buses to events where people already are, trying to remove some of those questions, stigmas, and also really just bringing it more to the front of somebody's mind that we're so attuned. If I'm gonna run to the grocery store, gonna run to the doctor's office, first thing most of us do is go grab our keys. We don't think about, should we walk there, should we bike there, should we take the bus? We just automatically go for our keys, and that takes a little bit of retraining of our brains to get over that.
Thank you.
Yeah, in a couple of ways. So propaganda or marketing, PR, getting that out there. Also show and tell, just like, for example, I rode Heartland B-Cycle here. And when I got here, I told people I rode Heartland B-Cycle here. Just some things that are as simple as that. And just having conversations with your neighbors. That is a, sort of like great icebreaker that I have with some of my neighbors when, we're coming in and we're riding the elevator today, and just talking about how we got to the places that we were going, and come to find out some of my neighbors actually use the Orbit line too. And then the last thing that I'll add is sort of just comfortability. Sorry, that's a hard word for me to say. But just making it more comfortable for people to use public transit and other forms of mobility. And I think that sort of comes down to developments. So for example, I was just in Lincoln this weekend doing some canvassing in some of their neighborhoods, and they have really wide right-of-ways in Lincoln, and it just makes you feel so safe. The buffer that's there between traffic and pedestrians who are using the sidewalk versus when I am using Orbit and I'm on Dodge Street and it's oh my gosh, these cars are literally right next to me right now. That is a scary and unsafe feeling. However, when all this new development is happening in the urban core, if we are able to push developers and push the city of Omaha to be able to say, hey, we need a bigger buffer between pedestrians and cyclists and the streetcar and all these things to be able to get people to even feel safe enough to use transit. I think that's one thing that would really help.
So I look at a big picture and I'm thinking you want to provide incentives and disincentives, and it's important to provide the incentives before you start taking away things like parking. But continue to make transit a really good option, like Lauren mentioned, the extra service that they provide during events, and then what's in the Metro Next plan, increasing service. And then as that kind of increases and you start getting more people to take transit, then you can start maybe taking away some of those parking lots, redevelop them into better uses, maybe make parking more expensive and that sort of thing, so that you have the balance a little bit better there.
Well, the benefit of going first is it hasn't all been said, but just quickly, it was touched on, but this may not be popular, but make parking difficult and expensive. When I worked in San Francisco, I had great transit options. That helped. It also was $40 a day, and this was 20 years ago, $40 a day to park. And if you left and came back, it was another $40. There was no way I was doing that, right? But there was both sides of the coin. I had great transit options to get there, and it was really expensive and really difficult to park and to get there. And so those two things made it a real easy choice. Just one anecdote. I don't remember when it was, maybe 15 years ago, and gas went above $4 a gallon. And I live near 55th and Dodge, and I saw more people waiting at the bus stops in the morning going downtown when gas was over $4 a gallon than before or since. So I think that right there is a little bit of empirical evidence that even small-ish cues like that do make people think twice. And if you provide them a good alternative to driving their car and spending a lot of money on gas, that they will do it.
Okay, David, I'm going to start with you again on the last question. And feel free to take more time on this, because I think this is a really important question. And a common theme or message in the film is that building transportation infrastructure is really an investment in the future. And it's going to be important if we're going to recruit and retain the best and brightest of the younger generation to invest in that infrastructure. However, in Omaha, there's a lot of focus, and even at the political level, on the perennial patching of potholes, my words. And that, to me, anyway, it seems like it's money. I'm not saying it doesn't have to be done, but when it's done every year over and over and over again, that seems like a waste of money when you could be investing in infrastructure. So if you, maybe you could talk a little bit about what you see as the future of Omaha down the road. You know, if in an ideal world, let's say 10 years from now, what would it look like? And, you know, is it going to be the same as it is now? I mean, we're kind of at a point now where there's two paths to take. We can keep doing things the way that we've been doing them, or we can look at things differently and look at transportation as an investment in the future. So I'd like to hear a little bit about from each one of you about kind of your vision for the future 10 years from now.
And I've got to go first for that one. No, it's a great question. And what do they say? You do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. That's the definition of insanity. So maybe we've got to do things a little bit differently. But I do think you've got to build new and build for the future. And you do have to take care of what you already have, right? People are going to drive cars. We all want to drive on streets without potholes. That's important to a lot of people. And so I don't mean this as critical of the question, but I think it poses, I hope, a little bit of a false dichotomy. And maybe this is me just taking my prerogative of getting to sit here and talk and not having to actually figure out how to pay for it. But, you know, Steve explained very well in the film, and I was fortunate enough to work on this with the city, so I have a deep understanding of how the financing for the streetcar works. And I think when you get creative like that and people come together, transit advocates and urban core advocates and the business community and elected officials, City Hall, you can do a lot. So I don't think you have to have either no potholes or no transit. But we do, I believe, have to really look at this differently. Again, I'm fortunate enough, I live about 55th and Dodge, I work downtown, so when I get home and I turn off, it's right when 90th and Dodge is like starting to back up, right, if it's the wrong time of day. But you know, you have to go past that. It's not good and it's not getting better in terms of traffic. If you go on I-80 westbound at 4:30 in the afternoon, it's not great often. We can't road build our way out of congestion and into the city I think we all want it to be. So we do need to think differently, but we also have to take care of what we have. I think, as others have said, we've made great strides. I've been back to Nebraska for about 20 years, and Omaha is, you know, a much greater place than it was when I moved here 20 years ago. We always can be better, and we're headed that way. But I don't think you have to have one or the other. I'd like to think that we can take care of what we have. Density is the key. When I was in planning school, getting a master's degree, I ended up doing something different, but I still have the title of my would-be thesis, which was Our Density Destiny. And I still believe in that. There's really no other way out of the conundrum that we, and all cities, find themselves in other than density.
Yeah, so what is my vision, like transit in the next 10 years? If you think about it as the question was, transportation is an investment. And, look at some of the major projects that have gone on in Omaha in the last 20, 30 years that we're still using today. And so you think about that with transit and, what we've done so far and what we can do in the next 10 years, it's going to still, there's not going to be a little bit of debt coming up, but I think it'll start to snowball a little bit. So I think the next 10 years, I'm hoping, obviously have our streetcar done, hopefully open next BRT on 24th, starting on the third or fourth one, and then hopefully getting started on at least our second streetcar extension or third. Hopefully start maybe looking at some other investments, farther out, and maybe contemplating, getting some more, cities in our regional metropolitan transit district, like Bellevue, or and then even looking across the river. So those are kind of the big ideas that I've got in my head. I'm hoping that we get started on some of these new corridors, and then just envision what our transit district is really going to look like in the future. So kind of get a little small start, but start to balloon.
Yeah, for me, I feel like we can't. My vision for the future is a city of Omaha that does not treat social services and public goods as it's a business. I think we all understand and know that it costs money to do these things, and even thinking about our current city budget and how it is allocated, there are very little funds that go to the social services that we really all, I would think, in this room care about, and also the social services that really make utilizing public transportation worth it, like libraries and parks and green spaces. And I would like to see a city that prioritizes that versus a city that is prioritizing having a surplus at the end of every budget year, while people are currently lacking access to all of these things that are essential and that we all care about. And I would really love to be able to see a city where these patterns, where we are reinvesting into these, historic patterns of development that we know that work, like density and like having multiple forms of transportation, and like having walkable cities invested in places not just in the urban core, but outside of the urban core, in our outer rings in North Omaha and in South Omaha. And then also at the same time thinking about what is that going to look like for our suburbs, because right now, as they illustrated or as they talked about in the film, the city of Omaha is coming to a point where we can't expand anymore. So we are going to need to diversify and create higher density in these suburbs. So yeah, I want a city where everyone is able to have access to all of the things that create, thriving neighborhoods in every community, not just in certain communities.
Thank you, Clarice.
Well, as somebody who runs a transit agency that has buses driving all over the roads, let's fix the potholes too. They're a little rough on a bus. But that being said, my vision really is that we realize really how important investing in transportation and transit is. There's a recent study in the Omaha area that says for every $1 invested in transit, the return on investment is $2. And if you pair that with supportive land uses, it's really 4.5 times for every $1 you invest. And so really thinking about that and what that could do for our city is so important. And for me, really my vision is twofold. One, that not only do we continue to grow and expand our services to be able to add new services and quality services to more parts of the city, but that experience is a really comfortable, inviting, equitable one. So we've been making a lot of progress the last few years in terms of removing barriers, in terms of how you pay fares, and some inequities in terms of the way our pass programs were set up. We've increased the way you can find and track your bus, and real-time arrival, improving where we're putting shelters and signs and information, and we need to really continue that. So it's not just the quantity and the where of the buses, but also the quality of that transit service as well. But the larger vision of how all of that works is really conversations like this and a better awareness and integration of walkability, land use planning, and transportation planning. Buses, streetcars, any form of transit's never going to do great with cul-de-sacs and no sidewalks. It's not going to happen. I can have buses run every 5 minutes, but nobody's going to be able to get on, and I won't have anywhere to stop. So it's really thinking about how all of this fits together. That is my vision for making this a truly accessible and comfortable multimodal transportation environment for Omaha.
It's so true. One of the things about getting to be the last ones to answer is everybody said everything already, and then whatever I say sounds repetitive. So I will say, to sum it up, I think I want to see a thriving city and then thriving regional metro transit. It's what my dream would be. And that obviously entails a lot of what Eric and Clarice were mentioning over there too, along with what Lauren was saying. All of those different factors are important. And I think we do have to get creative, and we do have to figure some things out right now and focus on, I think Scott mentioned it during the video, we need to focus on making what already works better or great, focusing on that, and then getting creative on how to expand little by little. It's going to take time, but again, I think great things come with time, with putting some thought behind it, with including everyone, with thinking about how this affects everyone, not just one area. And so I can share a little story about how just last weekend, my family and I, this is my husband and my 2 little girls, were in Kansas City, and we're checking out of the hotel. It's Sunday, we're stopping by to get brunch to be on our way back to Omaha. We park in a busy street downtown Kansas City, and our vehicle got stolen. And so we're down to one family, and we've done this before. It was also a car about 1.5 years ago that was stolen here in Omaha. So we've been through this once. And so the difference this time around, though, is that that streetcar that you showed on the video is what we rode for the rest. So we ended up staying in Kansas City for another day or another night, so that we could potentially hear back from the police, potentially hear back if all of our belongings were in the vehicle. So we're trying to not have to make the trip back if we needed to. So we're trying to be smart about that, and we decided to stay another night. And we had between the time that we realized our car, we were hoping it got towed, and it didn't. When we realized it was stolen, we were like, okay, we have, I think it was 6 or 7 hours by the time we finally heard back from the police. And during all that time, the wonderful thing that I did really enjoy, and I just brought that back with me, is we were able to get around. We did not stop. We have the 2 little girls. We hopped on and hopped off the streetcar there, and we're able to go to a restaurant, get some ice cream, still pretend to have a little getaway vacation with them for the weekend, and that was great. And so coming back home, though, it's been a little rough, and I do wish that, again, with 2 little girls dropping off school, picking up, and all, it just makes it a little harder to use public transportation, especially in a city, as we already saw, Car-Centric, where you need a vehicle to get, to the grocery store, you need a vehicle to pick up something at the pharmacy. It's a little harder, and so I do want to see this not be an issue in the future. I do want people to If they want to drive a car, great. If they don't, I want them to be able to have, my daughters, for instance, to be able to have that option of saying, I can still easily get around, be connected to Bellevue if I wanted to go there, other cities outside, even Lincoln, you know, wherever I need to be without having to worry about owning a vehicle.
Well, as far as potholes are concerned, local elections are in the spring, so I think you're never going to get away from the desire to fix potholes. I think one thing that is also telling is we had a $200 million bond issue to repair streets and to reduce the number of potholes. It included a tax increase. The public voted overwhelmingly to increase their taxes to fix potholes. On the flip side of that, we're building a streetcar that does not require any city tax increase or tax rate increase or divert money from any other use. It's paid for purely from those properties within that corridor of the streetcar and purely from the increase in value created by the streetcar. And if you look on social media, people hate it. So, you know, I think that tells you all you need to know about how, whether or not we need to, and whether or not we will spend money on potholes. But I think that what we're trying to do certainly is to create this kind of total mobility system. And you know, I think Lauren's comment earlier is exactly right. We should be treating transit in general as infrastructure. I made the point in the film that when you put tracks in the ground, it's pretty simple to say it's infrastructure. Eric mentioned the fact you have the platforms and the money that was spent on orbit, it becomes infrastructure. So those are simple things to see as infrastructure, but I think, you know, if we can treat all of it as infrastructure and make that investment in transit and other forms of mobility as important as putting the money into fixing streets and potholes, then I think we'll make a lot of progress, because we'll make transit more convenient, more affordable, and I think that if there was enough of a commitment to do that, I think it would also start to change land use, because you would see a city that was committed to spending the money to get the kind of transit system that we need to have in order to change the kind of investments that people make in the city. So, so the streetcar is a step in that direction, but to really get there, you have to have this total mobility system that we all think we need.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, and obviously you have to fix potholes, and I think that the point was that there is, just as you said, Steve, a real desire, you know, to fix potholes, but when it comes to public transit, it doesn't seem to be a priority. And so it's, in a sense, it's a competition for resources, but also somewhat of an uphill battle when it comes to convincing people that it's an investment for the future. So, okay, at this point, again, I want to thank all these excellent panelists. I'm going to ask them to stay here, and we have a couple of folks that are going to be taking questions from audience members of the audience here, and you know, go ahead and raise your hand. Thank you. Got a lot of questions. So we have a couple of runners here. If you could direct your question to a particular person, that might make it a little bit easier.
I guess I have the microphone first. And Lauren, is it? Okay. I am one of those people that I think Steve was talking about. Somebody who got on the bus in Council Bluffs, went to Omaha downtown, and went back and didn't think about it. Because my dad worked downtown Omaha, you know, that was what we did, and I could also go downtown Council Bluffs. So I can see the big difference in that. I think maybe we all here understand infrastructure, density, all of the words that you've been using, but if you go to my son, who's a high school graduate, he has no idea what any of you are talking about, because those words don't mean anything to him. He doesn't know what you mean by infrastructure. He doesn't know, well, he probably does a little bit, But those things, for a lot of people, you're talking way up here, and I'm way down here. That's one suggestion I have for you. And then secondly, when you're talking about why don't people park at the West Roads, take that from CHI, maybe a little bit of a commercial or something. We live now in the riverfront condominiums. I walk over here, I'm home, I'm still watching all the cars sitting in the parking lot while I'm in my pajamas, you know. So if there was a little video that said, okay, if I get on the Metro bus or the Orbit bus from downtown to West Roads, or from West Roads to here, and then you watch somebody who's trying to get out of the parking lot and how long that takes. So you have kind of a time lapse of, gee, I'm out there in 10 minutes and I still haven't gotten to my car in 10 minutes at the CHI. That's just my suggestion.
Yeah, thank you for that. So if I can just respond quickly, you know, I think you're absolutely right, and it kind of goes back to some of the conversation that happened earlier about really, you know, complex problems resolving complex solutions. These are very intricate, complex conversation challenges to really understand how all these pieces fit together. In my first answer, I kind of quipped that, you know, my go-tos are nobody's trying to get from a bus stop to a bus stop, and buses don't do well in cul-de-sacs. But reality-wise, it's much more of a complicated issue than this, and really something that is a lot more in depth. And really, you know, Metro has a hard time explaining to people, well, why are we not adding a lot of service to further areas further out west? I like to use the West Maple example of there's lots of businesses, there's lots of housing, there's lots of destinations that people would like to go to. And it is a major road with no sidewalk, a ditch next to it. It's still about a quarter mile to get to the front door of anything. And if you need to cross the street to go back home the other way on the bus, you know, you can maybe find a safe place to cross in a mile. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the reality is, you know, these are very difficult, complex things to explain, and it really takes, that's why I really appreciate this film, is because it does such a good job of explaining that bigger, more complex thing. And my marketing and communications manager here is sitting here taking notes on your other suggestions. But realistically, you know, Metro in the last few years has made a concerted effort to try to focus on a lot more community engagement, a lot more outreach. We now do travel training where we will actually go work with groups and teach them how to ride the bus, answer questions, remove some of those barriers. We're also investing a lot more in trying to be more proactive and at the table earlier in some of the land use planning conversations than we were in the past. But, you know, it is one of those things where we've had to prioritize scarce resources, and you know, all of those things do take resources that are the same as running service, and so it is a little bit of a balancing act, but very, very good points and observation. Thank you.
My question would be to somebody that's a city planner. Let's face it, developers are part of all of this. Why doesn't the city require developers to have in their plan some form of access to public transportation or mass transit, or charge them a fee to put mass transit out to their development?
Well, I think in terms of new development, part of the problem that we've talked about is the density issue. The density is so low that if Lauren were to try and extend a bus out to that area, it would require a lot of subsidy in order to make that system work.
They should pay for that.
Yeah, and so I think part of the problem is it is something that's probably too late in some ways for, you couldn't drive through a big long area where we didn't do that and then have something very dense and still have it work because you've had to travel through that long area. Now, having said that, I think that what we do see in the urban core is that the developers in the urban core are very supportive of transit and very supportive of trying to do what we're doing and reducing the amount of land devoted to parking, the number of parking stalls for their projects. I think it has also taken some work with lenders to also understand that. So when they loan money to the developer, they don't say, well, just in case that transit thing doesn't work, better build a bunch of parking. Because once you build the parking, you've dropped the density, you lose that benefit of density. So I think it's probably a little too much to put it on the back of the developer to do. There are a number of things that would take a while to get into that we did going back in the 90s and the planning that we did at that time to create nodes of density in suburban areas, with the idea being that maybe initially those nodes at the intersection of arterial streets would not be very dense. We'd still see a lot of parking and large fields of parking. But over time, many of those areas can become more dense. And because it's a node, from a transit standpoint, it can operate more efficiently because you can stop in one location, drop off, pick up a lot of people, and move on to the next location. And so you can get through that area quicker, and you can get further in a short period of time. So I think there are some things that we've done in terms of guidelines and requirements and zoning and land use decisions that help. I don't know that it would necessarily work to just say, developers, you need to pay for extending the transit in suburban areas.
Hello, my name is Farron. I'm a lecturer at UNO, and my sustainability classes just last week took a ride on Orbit. And so you've got 40 new folks who know how to successfully ride Orbit. And thank you to Lauren. 2 folks from Metro will be coming to the classes to talk tomorrow. So looking forward to that. So I've been around transit advocacy for over a decade and have, heard conversations when people have been asking for things and, asking for protected bike lanes, and it said, this city, there will never be green paint. That was a comment that was made. And I know, I pulled it up here, Jeff Speck, author of The Walkable City, had commented that he was boycotting Omaha. He'd had a 3rd invite to Omaha, and he said, I'm not coming because there's been no discernible impact from my visit. And he noted that the Public Works Director told me in a lie that they were required by the state to have a 12-foot lane standard. And so from my observations of transit advocacy, and we are both year-round bike commuters, I've ridden the bus for over a decade, there's been a lot of pushback from Public Works. And so maybe Steve, in your work with the city, you'll know or can speak to this. Are we making improvements? Because I know planning has fantastic ideas, Orbit, is wonderful. Metro is doing the best they can with the resources they have, but then there's just this wall in Public Works that will drown good ideas. And so maybe that's an exaggeration, but there's really been an impasse at getting through Public Works. So I'm curious if you feel that tide is maybe changing, or if there's a good way we could help that along.
I do think that the Public Works Department has made a lot of changes. I think that the focus that they have now, they're very supportive of the streetcar. They're supportive of some of the things that when you talk about the lane widths, they're a little more flexible now than they were in the past. And so I do think Public Works has made some strides, and I think sees a lot of this as something that they support. I guess maybe one way I look at this is that I think engineers are excellent problem solvers. I think what we have to do, though, is we have to give them the right problem to solve. And so I think that in many ways what Public Works is reacting to, and not just in Omaha, but in many places, are the things that they hear the most. And so what they hear the most from people is, I don't want to sit in traffic, I want to drive as fast as I can from point A to point B, and I don't want anything to stop me in between. And so that becomes a kind of prime directive for them. I think another thing that they are often asked to do is do more with less, and so they're trying to figure out how do I stretch my dollars as much as I can. And so sometimes what that means is simplify the design, simplify the construction, and just sort of plow ahead with what we've always done because we know how to do what we've always done. So I think that there are some steps that they've taken. I think they're headed in the right direction, but I think that it also requires help from people who understand to maybe give a different push in a different direction so that they're not only hearing from the person who says, I can't get from point A to point B as fast as I want. Instead, they start to hear from the other direction. And I don't care about how fast I get from point A to point B. I want it to be convenient, I want it to be enjoyable, I want to be able to do that without always having to get in a car. And I think if they heard more from that side, they would be more amenable to making some of the changes that we need to make.
Just to add very briefly to that, I think that was a perfect answer, most of what I was going to say. But the reality is, just thinking about it in terms of, what you measure does matter quite a bit. And so, we've always heard for years about how travel delay, level of service, those types of things. I'm certainly hearing a lot more conversation about looking at other things. Talked about Vision Zero and in the film, some other things that I think there is some progress that is really exciting to see. The important piece of this, though, is, just thinking about what are we actually trying to accomplish, what are we trying to do? Because the reality is that focus on removing vehicle delay, level of service, getting there as fast as you can, really is sometimes to the detriment to walking, biking, and transit users.
All right, this question's more for Clarice because you've mentioned it a couple times. Walkable cities. I'm kind of a big person of walkable cities, especially because I've only lived here a year and a half, but there's a big difference. Like, we can improve transportation and all that fun stuff, but walkable cities is where you want to get people outside and actually use that transportation. So, for example, like the Old Market, the Jean Leahy Mall, Blackstone, Old Town. All those are like some great walkable places. But then if you get to like North Omaha, you get to South Omaha, you get anywhere west of 72nd, you get to Dodge. That's not very walkable to me. So the only way I see for you to encourage transportation, more uses of transportation, is to make Omaha more of a walkable, friendly environment, because if I walk on Dodge, I don't really want to walk on Dodge. And if I'm taking a public transportation like a streetcar and it goes to an unwalkable place in the city, then I'm not going to be encouraged to use it. So do you have any suggestions on how Omaha will improve its infrastructure in the future, especially on the board, on how to make it more of a walkable city and not more of a pavement city?
Yeah, I don't know if this is necessarily my role on the board or not, but one of the things that I've worked on and will continue to advocate for is having a multimodal trail system that goes throughout our city. So I used to work at Spark, and I was a part of the team that led the development of the North Omaha Trail, and really one of the purposes of that trail was to reconnect North 24th Street to North 30th Street, which was dissected when the North Freeway was developed, and it really tore a neighborhood apart. There was the removal of 1,100 households and 50 businesses, and before there was really no safe or comfortable route for folks who were trying to get from North 24th Street or that side to North 30th Street, like where the North Omaha Transit Center is. And I think that it is a short, sort of like 2-mile long trail right now that goes throughout neighborhoods. But I think that trail is an example of what can be done throughout the community and what can be done when there is a push from community, and also collaboration, and also support from all the great philanthropic organizations in Omaha that have all the money in the world to do whatever they would really want to do to be able to bring that sort of project to life, and to be able to have that in neighborhoods throughout Omaha, and sort of just to, I don't know, provide another example is like one of the places that I always use is that I visited Amsterdam, and oh my God, great public transportation, great walkability, density, everything. And then even in the suburban parts, guess what? There are still biking trails and walking trails and bike lanes that are able to connect people that are in these sort of less dense areas to to the city center where folks are going to shop and to eat and to hang out and all those things. So just seeing more of that, more of the Beltline Trail, more connectivity, and like you were saying, specifically in a way that makes it more comfortable for people who, like, I don't consider myself a cyclist, but I do ride a bicycle, you know, and I don't necessarily consider myself like a commuter or a multimodal commuter, but I do walk places and take the bus places, and there just needs to be more sort of like, I don't know, like a lower barrier. And even I was talking about this with a couple folks earlier, but even just different language used around like what being that sort of person is and what that looks like.
And just one thing to add to that too, the areas that you referred to, I think, you know, Blackstone, Old Market, places like that, the interface between the private realm and the public realm is excellent. And it's transparent and it's interesting. You want to walk in places like that. My office is in the Woodman Tower, and I try sometimes to get out in the middle of the day and just, you know, go walk around for 15, 20 minutes. And if I go walk, let's say on Douglas up to Central High School and back or something like that, there's very little to interact with. There are entire blocks of blank street walls, right? When I worked in San Francisco, there was a rule in the municipal code, no blank street walls, right? You had to have a certain percentage. Now you could say that was maybe a little over-regulated, but you get the point. That interface between that public realm and that private realm is critical really to all of this. And I think when you look at that, it also shows you how these different things we're talking about all have to work together. You can have the best transit system in the world, but like Lauren said, if you're just going to a bus stop or you're going to be let off in a giant parking lot where you've got to, you know, then walk sort of, you know, without direction or whatever it might be to get where you're going, or there's only one interesting place to go, you're a lot less likely to do that than if there's 3 interesting places to go. Same thing with walking. So you can't uncouple the land use side of the coin from the transit and transportation side of the coin, and they really, really do reinforce each other.
Hi, quick question. Is there any appetite for free bus ridership? I know I don't want to take anyone's budget away if you're talking about not having enough money, but like the streetcars can be free, right? And then as a frugal, lazy person, like, oh, I could just take the bus 2 stops, right? Or is it a non-starter?
All right, well, I was actually going to direct it to one of my board members here, because it's really going to be their call. There are a few transit agencies that have gone fare-free, and, you know, that's really ends up being kind of a political decision as well as a financial one. Realistically, the majority of the operating costs do not come from fares. It is really a small portion overall. We are subsidized by property taxes is how we pay for the operating costs of public transit services. Like Clarice said earlier, it is a public service. It is connecting people, places, and opportunities that wouldn't otherwise be able to do that. We have thousands of people who wouldn't be able to go to school, would not be able to go to work, would not be able to make their appointments without the service we provide. And so that is subsidized much beyond the fares. It would be a hit financially, but realistically, it almost becomes a little bit of a political conversation. You know, as we talked about all day, right? We, as a city in general, as society, we tend to care a little bit more about the potholes than transit overall. And so the idea of subsidizing something free can become a challenging proposition.
I'll add that I've been a part of studies where transit systems are looking at going fare-free, and usually our guidelines are kind of if 10% or less of your operating, like annual revenues are coming from fares. So in other words, your fares are just providing about 10% of that annual income, then it might be worth just not doing it. And so last year I was involved in a peer review study for Oklahoma City streetcar. And one of the kind of talks was, you know, should this be free? Because the Oklahoma City streetcar was charging a fare, and like I was just there a couple weeks ago, and I just paid for a $4 a day pass to ride it all day. That's how much it costs, and you know, there's not a lot of people on there. And so we were giving them examples of like, well, Kansas City does this, and Cincinnati used to charge a fare, and then they stopped in 2020, and the ridership's gone up so much. And so we were looking at their financial data, and only 1.5% of their annual revenues are coming from fares. And it actually costs more to maintain the fare machines than it was than the money that they were taking in. So that was a pretty obvious case. And so that was almost a year ago when we did that, and they still haven't done it, but they said they're going to bring it up to the board for a vote in June, I guess, so we'll see. But that just kind of gives you an idea. There are some transit technologies, you know, like commuter rail, I think will usually get like half of the operating income will be from fares, for example. So some might be worth it, but yeah, you kind of look at the revenues, and it might not pay to do it.
Yeah, I guess the thing I would add is that it's a little easier for us with the streetcar in the sense that we are, because we're able to increase the use of this vacant parking that we have, make our existing parking more efficient, build less parking, and therefore start to raise the rates on parking. We'll reach a point where we'll actually be able to pay for the operation and maintenance of the streetcar through that parking revenue side of the equation. That's not something you can do everywhere. It's something we can do just in that corridor, basically. It's also, you know, we can pay for the streetcar within that corridor because of the billions of dollars in development that will occur. And again, not something you could do elsewhere. But I think, you know, what you've seen around the country is increase in ridership when it is convenient, and obviously not having to pay a fare is more convenient. For someone who is a choice rider that maybe has not thought about using transit before, when they have to think about, well, where do I get the, you know, how do I get the fare? What do I need to do? How do I go through the steps? Or, you know, if they were to walk up to a platform and actually have to pay or something, or pay when they get on the vehicle, you know, those are just little things, but it might be just enough for somebody to say, I don't really want to do that. I don't know how to do that. So I think it would be great if we could do fare free. I know there's some other issues that come with that, as Lauren said, but I think it would probably be a big boost to ridership on transit in general.
I like that, Steve. I always equate it to like having to put a quarter in the ignition of your machine every time, or your car every time you want to turn it on. You might take a fewer trips. But absolutely, I mean, I think it's definitely a very interesting topic, and it's a very relevant one right now in the transit industry, with the number of transit agencies looking at it. One thing I will say at Metro we are very proud of is we have a number of great pass programs. We also have not raised our fare in over a decade. It's something that we're very, very proud of. And we have actually recently instituted fare capping, which is a new thing where we're making sure that everybody gets the same benefits of a monthly pass. We used to charge $55 a month for an unlimited pass, and we found that not enough people were using that, and really found out it was because of the upfront cost of that. So we implemented a new fare payment system where it actually tracks. You put in $1.25 each time you get on the bus, and when you hit $55, it automatically stops charging you, so it lets you pay for it incrementally. So whether we go fare free or not, I think is a much larger conversation, and one that we probably should have, but looking at the accessibility of our fares and trying to not make that more of a barrier than it needs to be is of absolute importance.
And I just wanted to add real quick that I am 100% supportive of going fare free, and that a quick plug that on May 13th, voting day, fares will be free that day. So folks should definitely use the bus to ride to the polls.
Thanks. I think we're out of time. First, I want to thank the audience for coming here. I think this is my goal in creating this film was to have a discussion like this, and it's the beginning of a discussion that I think we need to keep having as a community. And I really, again, want to thank all of the panelists who agreed to be in the film, who agreed to come tonight and participate in this panel discussion. Big round of applause for them. On the Omaha Downtown Improvement District website, we are including some other events related to transit that If you're interested, please take a look at those. We are also looking at some additional opportunities to show this film and to continue this dialogue. And we'll be providing those on the ODID website as well once we work out the details of those. So thanks again to everybody for coming tonight, and I hope you take away something that you heard tonight, and maybe you'll think a little bit differently than you did before. So thank you.
Wow, I haven't heard that in so long. Oh, yes, you're right, you can hear it there, but, you know. Good.
Downtown improvement. Yes.
I do. Lots of cook. Very nice. Thank you. We're here at least a little bit.
Yes, that's right, not enough ski. Spring. Wasn't cut him off.
Oh, yeah.
Is there, because I mean, the problem is, yeah, the problem is so I'm
I was thinking,
and so I'm super happy about it. But at the same time, I think so two things. First, where are you? Oh yeah, okay. So when you're in no, those ones are not ever going to get any less expensive than this. However,